What's up, everyone? I'm Jackie.
And I'm Lindsay.
And we are Women Leaders in Sports Medicine.
Here to help you grow your game and own your game. Join us on Dr. Heather Linden's journey into combat sports. From sunny LA to the Olympics, and now the Director of Physical Therapy of the UFC, Heather shares the importance of listening to and educating your athlete to gain trust, the beauty of the UFC's interdisciplinary team, and also how to be successful in this model, and the importance of delivering results. As Heather said, our jobs are like puzzles, and puzzles are so much better with friends. As always, visit us at www.womenleadersinsportsmedicine.com for more opportunities and information. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy listening in. Well, hey, everyone. We have Heather Linden with us today, who is the Director of Physical Therapy for the UFC Performance Institute. So, Heather, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, ladies. I'm excited to be here and chat with you guys for this time. So,
awesome. Yeah, it's awesome. So, to get started today, just because we were mentioning before we started recording, it's a little bit of a weird time. What has this time off been like for you?
This is definitely probably the first time in almost 15 years of my career that I've actually stopped and taken a minute to myself. Besides missing being in the action and seeing my athletes every day and getting to, have that intimate relationship of helping them and, helping them grow as athletes, it's actually been really, really amazing that I could get back to kind of that research route and look into a lot of research, look at different policies and procedures that we wanted to do. Our team is writing a big journal, so it's allowed us to kind of come have a lot of meetings and discuss what we want to get out there from a journal standpoint, any kind of research we want to start working on. So, our every day is so busy that we never just get to stop for a minute and look into that. So I've actually gotten more accomplished, I would think, in these last month of reading newest research, joining different groups and seminars that are online to help with educating physical therapists, and then just really looking at trends of MMA, where injuries are occurring, pulling all the data from our electronic health record, matching that with our strength and conditioning, VO2 max, all these different diagnostics we do, and be able to start to put together MMA trends, which is something we're super passionate at the Performance Institute. And it's been amazing to be able to sit down and actually start to do everything that's on our to-do list. So
that's great. That's definitely a silver lining if I've heard one yet. So that's awesome. Yeah.
It's really nice. I mean, we're still doing, obviously we have about 600 athletes on our roster that have access to us. So there's quite a few of our athletes that are doing rehabilitation right now. A lot of their facilities and clinics are closed. So we're doing a lot of telemedicine as well. So, guiding their rehabilitations, having meetings with them weekly to make sure they're progressing where they need to. We have a few athletes that have had some chronic issues that reached out to us and were like, hey, this is the perfect time. We constantly bug them to fix things, and they don't fix things until they're broken. But this is the time that athletes are finding okay, I have the time. You've been harping on me for a year now to do something about this so it doesn't rear its head during fight camp, and I have the time. So what do I need to do? So, we've gotten to do a lot of that as well, but it's a little bit slower when you're not so physically hands-on and have the time to, spell out what their rehab looks like, what their different prehabs look like, and then get through all this research, which is pretty cool.
Kind of been hearing across the board, which has been really interesting, is just because we've been chatting with a lot of people in this past 2 weeks, of people kind of being in quarantine, and just we had this idea that our profession is so hands-on that we would be doing nothing. But I think you hit some really interesting points that are similar on our realm too.
Yep.
We're just doing, I've now found the time that I can sit and read journals and really get into the nitty-gritty of them, and we can start doing more conversations and podcasts like this. And I think a lot of us in the sports medicine professions are finding that we are actually very busy right now. It's just a little different way, and maybe not as always hands-on and as fun as we'd like it to be. But that's awesome that you're still keeping it busy over there.
And I think it also teaches our patients how to do a little bit of self-care and really take ownership. Because I mean, I think as physical therapists, we're constantly trying, we can only do so much with the hands-on, but it's a lifestyle change. It's changing the way they are so that these things don't come back, and they're having to actually take a little bit of ownership and learn to work with you on self-care and how to get over these humps. So I think it's a great thing for us professionally as well.
Definitely.
Great.
Teaching people, like you said, it's a lifestyle change. Some people have certain misconceptions of physical therapy when that really might not be the case. Which,
Sure.
speaking of physical therapy, what we like to start our podcast off with when we are not in COVID times is getting into your why. So why you became a physical therapist.
I was always an athlete growing up, so played multiple sports growing up, and so always had that connection. I also was really fascinated with the medical field. So initially I was thinking, being pre-med is what I started my undergrad degree in. And I was thinking of orthopedic surgery and things like that because I really liked, helping athletes and injuries that I had and had to overcome. But probably my first week at Virginia Tech, I was I was a cheerleader at Virginia Tech. So I was in the training room and I was talking to our athletic trainers and our PTs. And the PT was like, why don't you come shadow me? Like, I have an outpatient clinic where I actually see the football players and like where we actually do the rehabs. And I was like, cool. So literally the next day I went and started shadowing him. And I think within one day I was like, nope, that's what I want to do. I was like, the connection you actually get to make with people, which is, I'm a really, I would say, outgoing personality, which I really thrive off of like human contact, meeting people, having conversations with people. So I definitely felt physical therapy immediately was like the way I wanted to go. I didn't want to be behind closed doors, only working with athletes when they're under anesthesia or something like that. I really wanted to like make a difference in their world. And I felt physical therapy was the best journey to make the most impact on patients all over. So that's what got me there.
Yeah, I think that's a common theme. Obviously, so Jackie and I might be a little biased because we are physical therapists as well, but a common theme across the field is the connection you get to develop with your patient and how much you actually make a difference on their life. Like you said, it's a lifestyle change with a lot of these issues, and it's a great profession. Yeah,
I know. We're really lucky, actually, right?
We are. I think
people will always ask me, like, "Hey, talk to my son or talk to my," and I'm like, honestly, you can't go wrong. Like, there's so many journeys of PT, so many different aspects, so many different kinds of clinicians. I'm like, so if you ever got bored, like, you might do a profession where you're in accounting and you're going to do that, where we can go from orthopedics to geriatrics to pediatrics to neurology. So there's so many avenues under our profession umbrella. It's such an amazing career, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, total bias into it as well, obviously. But like for me, like the area that I work in, a lot of the high schools have really cool like sports medicine programs already in their school. And so a lot of these students are learning what sports medicine careers and physical therapy and AT and all that good stuff is very early. So it's really fun seeing like them want to come in as a patient and then be like, well, like I'm also taking this class and like, can I hang out with you a little bit and like learn from you? I think once you start seeing what we do and seeing like the fun stuff as far as re-educating movement and getting people back to quality of life, but also like we have fun in what we do all the time. Yeah. I think it sells itself a little bit.
I agree. 100%.
Moving into just kind of you a little bit more, tell us about your journey as a physical therapist, kind of how you started and how you got to where you were a little bit.
Okay. So I initially was like kind of debating between pediatrics and orthopedics. And one of my clinical instructors was like, as orthopedics is very manual, it's a very like demanding avenue. So like if you're going to go back and forth, you should probably do orthopedics first, just because you're young, you can pick up people's legs. If you want to do sports, things like that, you're going to be all over the place. So I ended up going down the orthopedic route, and I worked at an outpatient orthopedic clinic in Southern California for about 5 years. There was probably 5 clinicians there when I first started, and they were all kind of somewhat into sports. It's actually kind of ironic because the head PT out of that clinic was with boxing. So he was doing a lot of independent stuff with boxing and things like that. And, I wasn't even sure about combat sports, I would say. I was more familiar with collegiate sports and like professional sports. So like NFL and that kind of stuff. So I didn't really know a lot about the combat avenue, but learned a little bit from him. Unfortunately, 1 month after I took the position, he got hired privately by one of the boxers, and I was like, no.
Darn it.
I went from being the least experienced and being like one of 2 PTs because the other 3 got hired by different sporting agencies and stuff.
Oh,
and I was like, all of a sudden the clinic, it was like me and one other. And I was like, oh my gosh, where's my mentors? I really wanted to make those connections for the sports avenue and things like that. So kind of fell into my lap. So I just took those 5 years and really went from being inexperienced to taking a ton of continuing ed courses. I signed myself up to a manual certification course, which was like every other weekend for like a year. I, took as much continuing ed as possible and just was like, okay, I need to be able to do everything that an athlete would ask me to be able to do. And so let me just prepare myself as much as possible. But it also threw me into being a director of that facility. So it made me also have to learn leadership. It made me, we had Pilates instructors, massage therapists, and ATCs there as well. So, I quickly became the lead because they all fell underneath me. So I had to manage other colleagues. I had to learn kind of more of that multidisciplinary approach of using my Pilates instructors for spine rehabs, using my massage therapist when I couldn't do all the manual stuff myself and things like that. So it taught me, I think, some really good qualities that kind of shaped my profession now, especially, having a multidisciplinary approach. It was quite interesting. My mom called me one day and she was like, oh my God, the Olympic team takes volunteers. I know you always wanted to get into sports. You should do this. You know how mothers are. They're very persistent. Yeah. She was not taking no for an answer, but I was like, wow, that's really cool that you found out that the Olympic team takes volunteers. So at the time you had to have 5 years experience. I was just coming up on my 5 years. Now I think it's 3 years experience to do their volunteer work with the Olympic team. So I applied for that and I got into the volunteer program, which is a 2-week rotation you do at one of their facilities. And they have a lot of athletes there and they're small in numbers as well. So they really rely on these people to help volunteer, and they take all medical professions to kind of volunteer and help them out when they have busy months and things like that. So I did that avenue. And after my first week, literally the boss called me into his office and was like, can we meet? And I was like, oh no, what did I do? I was like, what did I do? I must have said something wrong to an athlete. But honestly, he was like, we have a full-time position and we think you'd be a great fit here. So we'd really like for you to consider applying. So I remember, they're like, you can't tell anybody else. So I remember running out, calling my mom and being like, oh my gosh. But decided to take that avenue. So I did 6 years at the US Olympic team. I was based out of Colorado Springs, and that's kind of where all of our combat sports train. So I was constantly covering practices for wrestling, covering boxing, gymnastics. So I learned a ton about combat sports, though I worked with all 50 something sports that are through the Olympics and Pan Am Games and everything in Pan Am Games and Paralympics. So got really a lot of experience with athletes, all different kinds. But, when you get thrown into a wrestling room and you're covering practice as a physical therapist, and there's this guy with a bloody nose and this guy with a shoulder sublux, you just kind of get thrown in and you learn to get your hands dirty and realize, there's a lot to learn out there. So I did that for 6 years and got a call from the UFC one day, and they said, there's not a lot of PTs that have combat experience, especially at the high level that you do. Would you ever consider coming over to us? And at the time, I really wasn't looking, actively looking for a job. I was quite content with where I was. I really loved what I was doing and impacting the Olympic movement and everything like that. But the UFC brought me in and pretty much said, what do you want to do? Name your brand. How do you think you can make us better? and starting with a company from the ground up with a big, really like positive team was just such a great opportunity I couldn't pass. So I've now been with the UFC. It'll be 3 years in June that I will be with them, and pretty much started right when we opened the Performance Institute. So day one of us opening doors, came and joined a team in Las Vegas of all different clinicians and different professions from all over the country and world. And now we have a really great team that we kind of just, we're like family. It's amazing. So
wow, that is such a whirlwind. So many events. Talk about like, getting thrown into the fire and rising from it. Like that's hard. That first, few years out, you learn so much as a clinician off of your mentors, and you were really able to go like, well, crap, like I still want these goals. I still want to get where I want to go. And you took a situation that was maybe hard for some people and were like, no, like I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to learn everything I need to learn and create a community of mentors through however many courses you take.
Yeah.
And same thing going into like US Olympics, like clearly, that hard work and that determination and that first portion showed in what you were doing in that first week to be able to be called in and have that moment of, oh crap, turn into like, oh, they
oh, hey, they noticed. Like, what? I mean, and it goes back to, I mean, I know my mom would like, my mom is always like hard. Like I just grew up, my parents are always like, hard work, it pays off. And I'm like, sure, mom. It's always about knowing somebody, getting that in. But really, my story is pretty much that's what it was. Just putting my head down, hard work, making sure that I had the characteristics and the different qualities that, all of these companies have wanted. And then, bringing that personality on top of it with experience and then hoping, that it does pay off. So.
Yeah, I'm sure your mama takes a little like part and like you got that job, like, oh, remember when I told you to go volunteer?
Well, she was like, as soon as I like got the volunteer, she was like, oh, you're gonna go work at the Olympics. I was like, Mom, I'm not working at the Olympics. And then of course I got picked to work at the next Olympics, and my mom was like, see, told you. And I was like, oh, mothers are always right, even when you don't want them to be, they're always right. So
that is so sure. So kind of moving into now, after kind of going through that whirlwind, you have an incredible team. You built something up from the beginning, which is really kind of a cool thing to be able to do. Tell us about just kind of like what your day-to-day looks like, maybe before COVID times.
You definitely wear a lot of hats, like, a lot of hats in this role. My day-to-day is not only fight injuries, but also, training and non-fight injuries. It's patient rehabs of a population of 600 athletes globally. So, they're texting you at 1 a.m. because they just broke their nose and they need to know if they need to go get an x-ray or, is it broken? So it's constantly juggling and moving pieces. Looking over both facilities, making sure my staff is like keeping the bar high, really gold level standard of care to everybody. I always challenge my staff to say, why should they come to you? Like if they go see, I really like a multidisciplinary approach. So I have chiropractors and athletic trainers with me and other PTs. So I'm like, why should they come to us and not someone down the street? What sets you apart? What makes you better? What makes, and whether it's maybe takes a little bit longer to find those objective clinical pearls and indicators that really set you aside of other clinicians. But I constantly challenge my staff to have the highest level of service possible at both facilities in Las Vegas and Shanghai. Learning and educating the MMA population. Like this population doesn't have a lot of research, doesn't have a lot of, they're really, I would say, far behind when it comes to other professional sports. So really trying to impact the MMA community is definitely a goal of mine day to day. Doing maintenance cares. I mean, my usual day is at least 8 to 12 patient treatments, and then the administrative on top of that, and then any kind of research and stuff like that. I also manage both staff at both facilities. So last year I spent, I think, 2.5 months in China with that staff, building that new facility there. I also traveled to all the pay-per-view fights. So I'm on the road. I think I was on the road 190 days last year with traveling to fights, managing my Shanghai facility, and then also managing our Vegas facility. Also, we have students, so I teach students. I do clinical rotations with our students as well. And then working really on a multidisciplinary team. So every day it's like, we are probably the most functional multidisciplinary team I've ever worked on in my life. Like, not one decision, somebody comes in and they're like, oh, I have an injury. And most I would say facilities are like, oh, that's medical. Go handle that over there. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, it's medical, but I need the right nutrition going on. I need him to do the other 3 body parts in strength and conditioning so his head stays focused. I need him to go upstairs and train MMA, even if he's sitting from a knee surgery punching bags, because psychologically he needs that. And then I need my sports psych on this because he's never had an injury or surgery before. So it's not just sports medicine. It's everybody coming in and pulling all those pieces together to be the most successful. And that's kind of how I've always been. The more brains, the more people, like, leave your egos out the door and do what's best for that athlete. And by getting everybody as a team together, that's going to be the most successful way possible.
That's a great statement you made on leaving your ego at the door. Mm-hmm. Just because, again, at the end of the day, I'm sure you can agree, it comes back to what's best for the athlete.
For sure.
And it sounds like you have a pretty tight-knit team where you are right now, which is great. I think one thing listeners would really benefit from is, even being in such a comprehensive institute, like, what have you found helpful in order to communicate with everyone across the spectrum? Or maybe what has been helpful if maybe your communication styles just don't match?
Yep. So one thing that we do is every Monday morning, we start the week off with rounds. So we are all in one room, every single discipline that I just named. So we have strength and conditioning, we have sports medicine, we have nutrition, we have sports psych, we have sports science, sports performance, and then we have Forrest, who's like our MMA person that kind of looks from the athlete standpoint. And we literally every Monday morning do rounds and discuss every case that we're talking about. So, a lot of people are always like, oh, well, you can't, like, I don't know if that athlete wants to do this, but like, for our waiver, when an athlete walks in the door, they have to realize it's a multidisciplinary approach, and we're not going to get the results that person wants and be so successful unless they allow us to talk about their cases, figure out how we can modify things. So communication is key. We're kind of forced to do it, honestly, at the beginning of the week. But then we also, like, my sports medicine team meets once or twice a week. I meet with my Shanghai team and we discuss cases, and we'll be like, okay, why is this athlete not progressing like we want them to? Or, wow, this athlete has a really good case study. They're way ahead of the curve. What did we do differently there? Or was it more the sports psych that came in? And I think what also helps is our facility is very open doors. So like, my clinic is all glass front doors. So if I'm working on an athlete, literally my strength and conditioning coaches come in and be like, hey, what do you see? Do you think they're getting better? Do you think we should change anything? And then we're a small clinic, so all of our rehabs are done out on the S&C floor. Mm-hmm. So like, it's just more, the PT clinic is more for manual care, and then we're out on the S&C floor. So the S&C coaches are always around us watching what we're correcting. So if an S&C coach watches me put the hands on an athlete and say, okay, he's doing this wrong, look at the way he's doing this, they're going to start looking at those things as well. So we're really having like the same viewpoint and looking at what we're trying to accomplish. So, I mean, constantly. And then like, I'm sitting there and an athlete's doing ice and I'm like, hey, did you fuel up today for recovery? What's your nutrition like? And they're like, well, and I'm like, hold on, text my nutritionist, hey, come on over. He comes in and he starts talking. And it's just such an open door communication that like, we have no issues. Like when I worked at the Olympic team, everything was sealed off. So S&C was in one room, PT was in one room, sports psych was in one room. Like everything had their own little doors, and it was kind of hard to knock down those walls sometimes. Like for me to go talk to S&C, I had to talk to my boss. Hey, is that okay if I run over to, they're going to talk to their boss. By the time you got to the athlete-centered model, it was 4 days later, and that wasn't even an issue anymore. So it's like, even when you're in private practice, utilizing your other clinicians. Like, I know people are a little nervous about, I don't want to lose a patient or them. But when you start collaborating and looking at different viewpoints, you get such better success that it's just, it's so important. So from the highest level to the lowest level, like of all ways, to handle patient care, the more minds, the better, the open-mindedness, looking at someone as a whole and not just as a segmented part that's injured. I think that just makes for a way more successful rehabilitation in all aspects.
100%. I work with strength coaches regularly because of the gyms we're in. And I'd say, again, just because most of my rehab happens out in the gym, they're coming over, they're asking questions. So definitely open-mindedness and transparency, yep. I would agree, is a huge, huge thing.
Because we're all humans. There are going to be times, when you might miss something, or there might be something. So, by not missing it, you're pulling in that someone else's eyes. And now if there's multiple people that have missed it, maybe it's not really missing it. There's things that weren't apparent, but if it's you just having that one focused eye on somebody, it's super easy to miss things, I mean, there's no cookie cutter, approach when it comes to humans, really. So every day, I think that's what's so cool about our profession is it constantly challenges you. It's like solving a puzzle and figuring it out, but puzzles are way more fun with friends than it is by yourself.
What a quote of the day there.
Seriously, 100%.
Yeah, I think you have such a cool opportunity to have access to those people all the time. I think so many times I'm, working with an athlete, I'm like, oh, if only I could just have, a sports psych person with me that would help them in this moment. Cause clearly there's some things they're working through. And my knowledge of that is only to, when there's A to Z. So I think, and being able to have all those people in house helps you think about some other components in your care for that patient as well, that maybe you wouldn't if you were working in a standard outpatient clinic, and does the same for other individuals as well, for strength and conditioning, for AT, for sports psych as well. Oh, what are they talking about with this thing? What is that? I think it's just a really cool opportunity that you have. And I think it's a model I think we're all hoping to strive for. And one of the reasons we're, we want this platform to be something is open up this interdisciplinary multimodal approach. Why are we shutting each other off from, this world when I have as much to learn from you as maybe you do from me?
And let's be real. How many people are out there with injuries? I mean, we have great, job security. Let's be real. Mm-hmm. People are living longer, doing more, weekend warriors, trying to stay fit. I mean, we're always going to have people that are injured or need our services in some way. So it's not really a huge competition because there's really not that many of us compared to how many people are out there that need our services. So it's, working and being, that was one thing I think when I was in private practice, I was like, I would love to shape insurance companies because I had a 90, they used to make fun of me because I used to treat my 90-year-old athletes 90-year-old patients like they were athletes. Yeah. And I would have them on BOSUs and doing juggling. Exactly. And they would be like, Heather, are you starting an over 90 football league? And I'm like, heck yeah, I am. If I can, I'm going to. And I had this little lady and she had fallen and broken her hip. So I did her rehab. Oh. She was then we had a gym attached to our facility. So then we transitioned into her working out and her balance and everything got so good. But then Medicare was like, well, she's good. So get rid of her. So we had to discharge her. And then she went back to her house. And of course she's 94. So she's not going to go drive to the gym and go to the gym on her own. So they discharged her, her health deteriorated, and then they had to pay for full-time care because she could barely get around her house by herself. And I'm like, if they had just kept up once or twice a week, the amount of money they had to pay for a full-time person to stay in her house and care for her and keep how successful she was with exercise and stuff is just crazy. So, I'm very fortunate that I have not done insurance billing since in 10 years. Over 10 years I haven't billed. I couldn't even tell you how to bill.
I'm so jealous.
Couldn't even tell you how to bill. But I mean, that's for me, I can spend 15 minutes with an athlete. I can spend 2 hours. My rehabs are seen twice a day, an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon. And the success rates and how fast the rehabs go is amazing because you're spending the time that they need when it's important. Okay, let's spread twice a week out, 3 times a week over 6 weeks. But if I get them really good in 5 weeks, you should be able to juggle what you need as a clinician and know what's best for that patient without insurance driving us and things like that, which I'm so lucky that that's what I get to do every day. So.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I think we run into that a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's also another good kind of point about like treating individuals in the spectrum, as far as, you know, a lot of people coming in are likely going to start at an ortho basis and have to get their feet wet and get the experience, because you have to open doors in sports to get there. But like, you know, you just because someone's 94 doesn't mean you treat them like a 94-year-old. I think you do them a disservice in doing that. Like, treat them for what you would do for anyone else, and it might just be different. But on that note, I mean, like for you, you're kind of dealing with the opposite end of the spectrum, the elite, the like crazy combat athletes that you touched on a couple of points. Like, the research on it is so poor, and you know, that's something that I'm excited for growing in the future. But what challenges do you see, or what things have you kind of learned dealing with the elite athlete or the combat athlete specifically?
So initially it was super tough to break down the walls and really gain their trust, because they are combat athletes. I mean, they get in an octagon and create injuries, and they can push through things that you don't think is humanly possible. So for me to bring them and say like, hey, trust me, that was the hardest, you know, barrier to break into. And also that it's not normal to be hurt going into a competition, because, you know, they do these fight camps and they have injuries that rear their heads during that fight camp, and they don't have health insurance. They don't have this. So there's a lot of times when, you know, they just think that's normal to have, you know, my shoulder hurts. You know, I think it was my first time that I traveled to an event, I had an athlete come in and be like, you know, I have numbness and tingling in my hand. It's weaker. You know, I can't throw with my left hand, but that's normal. That happens every fight camp, and that's okay. And I'm like, no, that's not normal. Like, you have this, let's work. And like within 1 week, right before that, he was like, oh my God, I don't have any numbness. I can lift my arm overhead. Like, this is going to be an amazing fight. Like, I can actually do. And I was like, yeah, like this is what you're supposed to. So, you know, my population tends to go extreme. You know, they're also the type of population, if I say do this 10 times, they're going to do it 100 times. So I have to really like hold hands and be like, hey, what are we doing today? What's the plan? What are we going to do? But it's just really teaching them. I think the biggest obstacles was that I wasn't going to pull them from a fight. You know, I take their fights as very similar to the Olympic Games. And I think I transitioned that really well with our population, because my athletes at the Olympics would train their whole life for one day, one opportunity to get on that podium. And you're going to do everything possible, as long as their overall health is not in jeopardy, you're going to do everything to get them on that podium. You know, you're going to, if they have an ACL, you're going to work with stability and thorax, because they can't get the surgery, they'd be out of the Olympics. You're going to work on taping and strapping. You're going to do ways that you can counterbalance that to make them as successful as possible and still achieve their dream. And that's how I look at our fighters. Like, they don't know when they're fighting again. They don't know if they're going to get injured in that fight, and they don't know what their income is going to be coming in. So teaching them that I'm there to make it better, to improve things, and to also not just pull them from a fight. I mean, I've had athletes that I knew had fractures going into fights. I've had athletes with, you know, partial ligament tears, and they're like, but there's nothing I can do. And I'm like, okay, we're going to do shockwave. We're going to do laser. We're going to promote healing. And we can get the inflammation out. When you get the inflammation out and restore function, it's amazing with an injury how little discomfort you have when you do all those right things. You know what I mean? So for this, so it's like, I think the biggest obstacle with them is trust, and teaching them that, like, you know, I'm not here to pull out and ruin their income. I'm here to collaborate with them, be part of their team, and get through all these little chronic issues and injuries that come up. I'm also a sounding board with like, hey, is this something I should be worried about? You can send me a video. You can send me, you know, a text message on, hey, is this something I need an x-ray on? Is this something that you think? Like, you know, just having a medical person, I think, as, you know, a resource is huge. I mean, look at all of us. I think wherever we go, our families and friends are like, hey, I have this injury. What do you think? I mean, we can't, as physical therapists, literally go anywhere without someone being like, I have this pain. I've even like, even in the dating world, ladies, you'll like go out on a first date and they find out you're a physical therapist and they're like, my shoulder. I'm like, shoulder. Right. I'm like, wait a minute. But so I mean, it's just, you know, in that sense, this population is great because they will really give you their all. And there's such like, they have no egos as athletes because they punch each other for a living. So, you know how there's those like statements where you're like, gosh, I wish somebody would punch him because he's being an idiot or something, or like, hey, they do that. So when they get out of the octagon, they are the most sincere, caring individuals ever. So they're just amazing to work with. Like, they're like, hey, can I bring you lunch? You stayed up till midnight last night helping me. And like, they're just really thoughtful. So, initially they were athletes that I had to really break down and show that I wasn't here as the big green person to pull them out of fights. But now I have such a good understanding. I've worked with like about 80% of our athletes on the roster, and now they know kind of what my background is. They know that I'm here to help, and they'll do pretty much anything that I ask of them. They're great.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really like big point there, and that's like the athlete mentality and breaking into that. I think a lot of people see us as a threat to what they want to do in their life and their passion. When, like you said, in reality, I'm not trying to mess with your income or your life's passion. I'm here to support it and to bolster it. So that's huge in being able to work with the athlete. And that's also a huge challenge in being able to work with them as well, and being able to like break it down into them in a way that's like, no, like, like you got to trust that I'm trying to make this better. And that's also a really cool moment to see them get better. And then for them to be like, oh, like, like that moment you were talking about, like, I can lift my arm up and I don't have any numbness and tingling, like such a cool moment to have with your athlete. And now,
it is.
You're in.
Yeah. And once you've gotten into one, the work, it's like any other sport or any other, even outpatient clinic. Once you've impacted someone, I mean, they talk. I mean, I remember when I was an outpatient, I treated this one gentleman, and I think he was Hungarian, and I fixed an issue, and he brought his whole family. Like, I saw his son, his mom, his dad, his brother, his aunt, uncle, like, it's the same thing in an athlete population. You actually fix somebody, and then the next one's on the door like, oh, this guy said you did something really good. And then it just blossoms in a really good, trusting environment. And then you can really make an impact. And, you can start to look at, okay, here's the trends. What are we seeing? Like, I'm super stoked that we have about 3 years of data now that we can say, okay, like, I really think the whole concussion thing and lower extremity injury prevalence in 2 years, I think it's something we haven't looked at in MMA. And I'm super excited this year to start pulling that data to be like, hey guys, because I know firsthand of several athletes that I can count on my hands of just like, okay, he got knocked out and then he had an ACL injury, like, 3 months down the road, and this and this. So like, it's really cool to start to find those trends. And I think then do prevention with this population and teach them like, hey, if you might not think you have any symptoms from a concussion because you don't, but like, you have to look at this. Like, I had an athlete recently that got knocked out, had no symptoms of concussion. Like, literally the neurologist was like, no, you're good. Like, you don't have anything. But I went back and I did their like C3 logic, their neurocognitive testing, and everything was about 50% delayed, slower than it was. All of the reaction stuff. And so to show the athlete and say, hey, like, yeah, you might not have symptoms, but reaction wise and everything you're doing is slower by 50%. And they were like, oh my gosh, like, so then they like bought into it and started doing a lot of reaction stuff. And within 2 weeks became completely even better than their baseline was. But it's like, if they hadn't worked on that, where would that have come down the line and maybe further had a different injury that then put them out for a whole year, So it's really trying to get ahead of the game. And I think we're finally getting there at our facility, which is really cool.
And I mean, I think one thing you touched on too, besides like how to gain someone's trust, is like through one, proving to them how you can help while you're there, but also through education, which helps prove to them how you can help while you're there. Because I still have this happen. I have patients come in. I see a lot of CrossFitters, a lot of the baseball population. And they look at me, and I'm 5'5", 135 pounds, and no one thinks I weight lift, which it's just my physique. That's the way I am. And no one thinks I've ever played an overhead sport in my life. So they look at me and they're like, you've treated so-and-so from that team? Like that, he referred me. This is the person he referred me to. But again, it's all about education, gaining their trust, how you're going to help. So it doesn't matter. But yeah. So
my first day, this is actually really funny. My first day, Francis Ngannou, who's like our huge heavyweight athlete, if you're familiar with him, he's like, I think 6'4", maybe. I mean, he walks around at almost 300 pounds. Like he's huge. And he's like, this is the PT you hired? And I was like, yes, I'm your PT. That's me. And he was like, you're not going to be able to do anything. And to this day, he's like, she kills me. He's like, I don't know how this little thing, she's 5'2", like 115 pounds, and like, boom. He's like, I don't know. I'm like, you learn to use your body. You learn mechanics, biomechanics. You learn. And he's to this day, he's like, he always laughs at me. He's like, I can't believe I was giving you such a hard time being my PT. He's like, no, he's like, you're the only one I won't mess with. He's like, I'll fight anybody, but I won't fight you.
That's hilarious.
Tiny but mighty. That's what I always tell my patients, because I get that regularly as well.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, that's so funny. So I guess we could kind of touch on maybe some obstacles you've experienced next, because that's definitely one of them. All three of us, I'm sure, can relate to that on some aspect. But are there any other obstacles, maybe whether it was like differing opinion between like you and an agent or someone else in the medical field, or whether it's like a gender bias that you've had to overcome, or that have taught you something as a clinician?
I mean, I think initially starting, there was definitely a little bit of the gender bias with our athletes, but I also think it worked in our benefit, in the sense of like, it's amazing. Like a man will tell a female a lot more. When you're on the table and they start to gain your trust, they'll really open up. And you don't necessarily always see that with the male clinician. So, it was crazy because I'd have these big guys on the table, and strength and conditioning would come in and be like, hey, Heath, what do you think? Like, this is not working out. He's complaining of this. And, his session was really bad with me. And I'm like, oh, well, he didn't sleep. He's fighting with his girlfriend. He's this. And they're like, oh. So it, like, initially, I think from our athletes, they looked at the female thing, but then as the team, it was a huge bonus to have a female, because I just feel like we're pretty good at breaking down walls very well.
Mm-hmm.
We're talkers, and I think that really helped, because from a clinical standpoint, we could like really get into the athletes, of what was going on, and see a lot of different sides from them, because I was female. Obstacles wise, I'm really lucky. I think the only problem, it was hard to break down the coaches, because it's never really been a performance sport. It's kind of been a grinded out sport, don't show weaknesses, don't do this. So I think if any obstacles I've really had to encounter, it was more from a coaching standpoint. But again, if you work hard and your work shows a huge significant progress, having one athlete that I fixed and then go to the coach, then that coach all of a sudden is like, okay, what'd you do? And that starts, spiraling and getting really good trust in the coaches. So I would say, I think actually from a team standpoint, I can't say we've had obstacles. I mean, we love working together, and we love getting better as a group. So we're not those people that are like fighting over who's, at the top and doing this. It's like, let's just put an athlete-centered model. But I think our biggest obstacle was getting the trust and showing coaches that, this sport, if you actually look at the performance aspect of it, those are the people that are going to have long-lasting careers, that are going to stay healthy, that are going to walk away from the sport healthy. Like if you look at right now our current champs, a lot of them are really good athletes. A lot of them were top wrestlers. A lot of them come from that performance background. So I think that our biggest obstacle is transitioning the sport from a straight, like grinded out sport to show that performance impacts athletes amazingly, and especially when you have a full team behind them, that they will rise and be at the top, and they'll stay there. They won't do this up and down stuff. So I think the biggest obstacle is like just really showing the MMA world that like, we're not here to tell you how to do it. Like one thing I think is most important is when athletes come to us, we are strictly objective data given to them. Like they come in and I do a full eval. I do concussion screen. Our strength and conditioning does power and strength VO2. Our sports performance does various metabolic efficiencies with our nutrition team. Like, so we literally have all this data and we say, here's your data. And they're like, okay. And we're like, we're not coaches. We're not skills coaches. We're not. So like, don't look at us to tell you what you need. Do you take what you're good at and build off of, because that's how you win your sport? Or are you losing because of your weaknesses? Like, this has to be a full team approach, even with the coaches and everything like that. So we literally are there to give you really good, solid data on what we think. We have enough information where we can say, hey, as a 135er, your power is here, your strength is here, your body assessment's here, and this is what we give them. And then what they do with them depends on what their coaches and stuff want to do with it. And if they want our advice, we're there to give them like a clinical, like, hey, yeah, he doesn't kick well because his hip mobility is horrible on that side. And and this is what you can do if that's what you want your goal of your athlete to be. So I think that's one important thing I think that we do really well. And that's how we've broken down those obstacles of the coaches, is not there to tell them how to do their job. We're there just to give them insight and give them objective data and be researchers and show, hey, this is how performance can be better. If you want to take it, cool. If not, that's cool too. We're still here to help if you need something, but that's just our objective data that we can give you.
Yeah. Talk about changing a narrative. So 2 things there. That's what Jackie and I talk about, or what we're trying to promote with this platform too, is to change the narrative a little bit. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter your gender. If you deliver results at the end of the day, you work hard, you're a good person, you can end up where you want to be. But changing a whole narrative in a sport where it's geared towards one mindset, good for you guys. That is that's your undertaking. But at the end of the day, like you said, you're just trying to provide a resource for the coaches. And they could take it or they could leave it, and you all have to work together at the end of the day.
And the interesting thing in our sport is, like, I think the hardest thing that I struggle with is I treat both people. So I'm sitting there in a room and I get to know a girlfriend, kids, family of this one athlete. And then an hour later, I'm with his opponent. And so that was a huge obstacle for us, is working with both opponents. We're like, if you work on a team, of course you're like, oh yeah, I'm working for this team and this is who I want to win, or something like that, where we work for both. So that was a huge obstacle, because they were like, are you going to tell my opponent? Are you going to do that's a huge thing. And we had to really break down that barrier and be very neutral and very objective, and just, give both athletes everything we have and let them, do what they do in their sport. Like, my boss at the Olympic team once was working on a different country's athlete. And I was like, why are we helping them? And what his advice, I think I took with me, was, on any sport, you want an even playing field. You want 2 people to win, 1 person to win, because they are a better athlete on that day. Not because there's an injury, or not because his nutrition stink, or because, it's athleticism. And that's the biggest thing that everyone strives for. So, you want 2 healthy individuals. And what we had to learn, because we'd get criticized if someone we worked with lost, and they're like, oh, and they worked with the PI, they lost. But it's not that. If you go into that octagon feeling better, your weight cut was better, you had the best S&C during your fight camp with no injuries, your training was good, our job is done. The results don't matter to us. The results are done when you walk in that octagon. And you know what? You can have a bad day at sport. I mean, everybody does. Everyone has good and bad days. But if you went in there as a better athlete because of something we did, our job is done.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's something I almost didn't really think about, is the idea that you are in the athlete's care for both sides, which is crazy, because you have all this knowledge about one versus the other. And I think that maybe sometimes plays into earning the coach's trust, because the coach is who that athlete has all of their trust and love and passion to. So I think being able to be objective, like you were saying, and just stating facts, and now with combat sport, because it is so young in this narrative change into the idea of creating it in a performance-based way, with research coming out, I think all of that is going to start helping, these coaches be like, oh, okay, I guess that's fine. That's huge. That's huge.
For sure.
Moving into, there's there's clearly so much that you've learned and had to have learned because you've been thrown into so many different sort of situations, which is really cool. What sorts of pieces of advice would you have to someone who's wanting to either just get into the sports realm or combat sports or whatever it may be for, our next generation of physios and strength and conditioning coaches and all that type of stuff?
Yep. I think there's two biggest things that stand out for me, like that I always try to preach. One is don't get sucked into the rabbit hole of one style or technique. You'll see people go learn a technique. I'm just pulling one out, like, okay, I'm certified in active release, or I'm certified in functional this, or I'm certified in this. Well, for me, I always just was like, okay, I can take 1 or 2 courses in that and I can apply it then. I don't need to take 5 of the same application of a course to have my name on a list and pay $1,000 a year to get more in debt to have this certification. Know the tech, so open your mind and learn more techniques if you want to be in sports, because the minute an athlete walks in your door and you're like, I do active release, and it's the only thing you do, you're going to lose a huge amount of population and maybe not be able to fix everything that comes down your window. So, take as much education as possible. I understand if you don't take another course in it. If you don't get the philosophy and the application, take it so you know it. But don't necessarily put yourself down one avenue or rabbit hole of one specialization or technique, because you're really limiting yourself for what's out there. So that's one thing I definitely love to tell people. And the other thing, if you're in sports, listen to your athlete. Listen. Most of these athletes have seen 100 clinicians, thousands of clinicians. And the one thing I learned, I had an athlete once see a volunteer once I was a full-time employee at the Olympics. And I remember hearing the athlete say to the volunteer, like, hey, this is what happens. I know when this happens, like, I usually get cupping on this. It's, my fascia gets really tight. It works well. Awesome. Well, the volunteer didn't do 1 ounce of cupping on this athlete. Well, I had this technique, and you could tell that volunteer just wanted to prove the worth of themselves. But 5 seconds later, the athlete came to me and was like, I'm never seeing that volunteer. Heather, will you just cut my friggin' leg like you normally do? Because I have to get back to practice. So listen to the athlete. If an athlete says, and listen to your patient. I mean, half the time your patient is telling you your story that's going to make you successful in fixing them. So listen, what works, what doesn't work. Don't have an ego where you have to prove you know something. You'll do it if you listen. If that volunteer had listened to that athlete and cupped him, it would have been like, dude, that volunteer is really good. He did exactly what I had needed. I was able to return to practice immediately. So my other really big word of advice in sports is A, listen to your athletes, because they really will tell you what they need. And B, get as much education and learn as much and keep an open mind to all different kinds of techniques that are out there, because there's just that one patient or athlete you might see that will need that certain technique. So just be open-minded when it comes to all of that and educate yourself.
I think those are really 2 really good points. I think one kind of brings it back to put your ego to the side. And I know we talked about that at first in the sense of with your colleagues, but that does follow suit with your athlete or your patient or whoever you're seeing, because just like you said, they've seen lots of people, and for some of these things, they're repetitive injuries. They're doing a repetitive type of sport. So they know this has helped them in the past. And there's no use in being like, oh, well, the science says that this doesn't work and this doesn't work. Even if that's the case,
right,
do it. It made them feel better, and then go do whatever meaningful things that you feel.
And the minute they feel better, they're going to trust you to do the other stuff they might say this works, and you're like, oh my God, that works. Why does somebody ever do that to somebody? But if it worked, make it work. And then you can start to break down those barriers and say, actually, no, hey, this is I had a hockey player at the Sochi Olympics that came in and did ice and stim 3 times a day for his shoulder. And we weren't supposed to work with them because they brought their own people, they're NHL players and blah, blah, blah. So I'm sitting there and he comes to me. He's like, hey, do you know how to hook up ice and stim? And I'm like, yeah, sure. No problem. So I put ice and stim on him and I'm like, so is this really helping you? I see you're doing it 3 times a day. And he's like, no. I'm like, then why are you doing it? And he's like, I don't know. That's what the person told me to do. And I was like, okay. And he's like, why would you do something different? And I was like, oh shoot. You're like, open my mouth again. And so I looked at my boss and he's like, you can treat him. And I was like, okay. I said, well, I'd have to do an evaluation on you and see what see what your findings are, see what needs work. And so I did an eval, and it was an AC joint, and his scap was moving like crap. His glenohumeral, like everything from an arthrokinematic standpoint was off. Muscles were in spasm. Like it was just a mess. Mm-hmm. So I worked on, like, evaled him, worked on him, and he was like totally overhead. And he was like, oh my gosh. He's like, can I see you every day? And I was like, sure. But like, it took me taking my ego and not being like, why are you doing ice and stim on this thing again? 3 times a day? Like, really, dude? But I did it. I put my ego, I did it. And then it just broke down the doors and started, like, opened up conversation. And then we got to be productive and do more manual based stuff that actually impacted him.
Well, that's amazing. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today and giving us some nuggets of wisdom to pass along to not only physical therapists, but really anyone in the sports med field.
Perfect. I'm glad I could speak with you ladies, and thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Women Leaders in Sports Medicine podcast. This podcast is for you to take a step closer to your dreams. Visit www.womenleadersinsportsmedicine.com to join our roundtables, learn about our mentorship programs, and to let us know what you want to hear. Have a great day, and remember, it's your time